This thing is definitely putting down some amazing performance. 4K Ultra here with Modern Warfare 2. I mean, this looks awesome. What's going on, everybody? It's ETA Prime back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the brand new Nvidia 4070 Ti. Now this is one I've been waiting on. ZOTAC was kind enough to send this over for review, and this is their AMP Extreme AIRO version. They also have the AMP AIRO and the Trinity that they're going to be offering over on their website, but this seems to be one of the higher end versions that they're offering right now for the RTX 4070. And of course, when it comes to these 4000 series cards, we're still working with a pretty big GPU here, as you can see. Now, like I mentioned, the 4070 Ti is actually one I've been looking forward to, and it really comes down to the price compared to the other 4000 series cards on the market. Inside of the box with the ZOTAC AMP Extreme AIRO, we're going to get a GPU support bracket. I'm actually glad to see that they're including this with the GPU because they can get heavy and sag quite a bit if they're not set up properly, but having this bracket really does help out. We've also got that newer Nvidia 4000 series power adapter, and this does require the connection of 3 8-pin connectors from your power supply. It's recommended to use a 750 watt power supply with this GPU, and power consumption can get on up there to around 285 watts. In my opinion, the overall design with the ZOTAC version looks really good. It's got that Ice Storm 2.0 cooler, and this is actually a 3.5 slot GPU, so you will need quite a large case to get this in there. And real quick, I just kind of wanted to give you a size comparison. We've got the RTX 3060, the RTX 3080 Ti, and of course, the RTX 4070 Ti. As you can see, it's definitely a hoss and coming in much larger than the 3080. So the 4070 Ti has 7,680 CUDA cores, and this ZOTAC version does boost up to 2700 MHz, but they do have their own proprietary overclocking software, and we can get it a bit higher. 12 GB of GDDR6X VRAM. It does require 3 8-pin connectors. It'll pull up to 285 watts, and so far I haven't seen it hit that, but it's getting real close, and they do recommend a 750 watt power supply. When it comes to testing out this ZOTAC 4070 Ti, I'm going to be putting it in my personal rig. So when it comes to the CPU, we've got the i9-13900K. I know it's overkill for gaming, but this is kind of my workstation / gaming station, and it works out great. 32 gigabytes of DDR5 running at 6000 megahertz, and a Corsair RM 850 watt power supply. Now, I'm actually taking my 3080 out just to put this in for testing, and with the 3080, I was really happy with the performance there, but there was some stuff that I really wanted to play at 4K. I just couldn't do it with no DLSS, so hopefully the 4070 Ti does outperform that. So I gotta say, I do love what ZOTAC has done with the RGB on this 4070 Ti. It looks really good here. I'm not a huge fan of RGB, and I say that, but I've got RGB in this PC. It's kind of hard to avoid it now in 2023. But yeah, the card itself looks absolutely amazing. Really hope it lives up to the performance I'm thinking this thing's gonna put out. Okay, so before we get into testing, give you a quick look here. We've got the i9-13900K, 32 gigabytes of DDR5 at 6000 megahertz. And I did want to check, the maximum clock on this 4070 Ti. I'm not doing any kind of overclocking, but taking a look at GPU-Z, when I run a stress test on it, actually jumps up a bit higher than 2700 megahertz. We're actually at 2895 megahertz. Nice little surprise there. And in this video, I'm not going to be doing any kind of power overclocking or any kind of core overclocking with this GPU. I'm really interested to see what this thing's going to do right out of the box. And of course, by the end of this video, we are going to be testing out a little bit of emulation. I wanted to see if we could do PS3 at 8K with this. We'll also test out some Nintendo Switch. But the first thing I did was run some benchmarks. Taking a look at Geekbench 5 CL score, we got a 214,462. And just to give you an idea of the performance jump over the old 3070 Ti, that was sitting at around 147,000. Now we're also coming ahead of the 3080 Ti, but right behind the 3090. Moving over to 3D Mark Firestrike, we got a total score here of 42,776, and I've also ran the same exact system with that 3080 Ti and even a 4090. As you can see with this benchmark, we are coming ahead of that 3080 Ti, and of course we were never going to come ahead of the 4090. But the final one here is Time Spy with a total score of 22,386. Kind of the same thing here with that 3080 Ti and that 4090. And just taking a look at these synthetics, it's definitely not too far off from the 3080 Ti. So if you're already rocking a card like that, there's absolutely no reason to upgrade to the 4070 Ti. And really, the only reason I mention it is because the 4070 Ti is actually only coming in $100 cheaper than the older RTX 3080 Ti. Retail on that was $899. Retail on the 4070 Ti is supposedly $799. But now it's time to move over to some real-world gaming. I mean, we could run synthetics all day, but I want to see what this thing can do. And first up, we've got Spider-Man Miles Morales, 4K, very high, no DLSS, absolutely amazing performance. Now, with most of this stuff, I'm just going to go up to 4K. We're kind of at that point right now where, yeah, it's going to run it at 1080 and 1440, no problem. And with this one, we got an average of 87 FPS. So you'll see it jump up way higher than that when we're up in the air, but down there where everything's happening, we've got that average right around 87, which isn't bad at all given that we're not using DLSS. Moving over to my favorite racing game, we've got Forza Horizon 5, 4K, Extreme, no scaling whatsoever, and this is one of those games that does perform quite well on a lot of different systems. And with this 4070 Ti, I mean, totally maxed out here with Forza Horizon 5, we can get an average of around 112 FPS. And of course, we could drop this down to Ultra, but we're at those extreme settings, 4K, no scaling. Next on the list, we've got God of War, 4K, Ultra, no DLSS. I thought we'd get a little more out of it, like it sits right now. Don't get me wrong, it is playable like this. We got an average of 78 FPS. But given we're working with the new 4000 series card, I figured it'd be a bit more. And of course, we can get a lot more out of it by turning DLSS on. Just went to performance here. And now we can get an average of around 114 FPS. And I'll tell you, I mean, even going to performance at this higher resolution, it's really hard for me to tell by my naked eye that there's any difference between the resolution itself. This looks really good like it is. You know, I had to throw Doom Eternal in here. In my opinion, this is one of the best optimized games out there. I mean, be it for Linux or Windows, it just basically runs on anything. We're at 4K, Ultra Nightmare, no scaling whatsoever, and we can get an average of around 168 FPS. Cyberpunk 2077 4K with the Ultra Ray Tracing preset. You got to keep in mind that this does enable DLSS. Once you go there from the settings, you can disable it, but when it's disabled, Ultra Ray Tracing, this is going to get around 30 FPS. Now, what I wanted to do here was just take it down to, let's say, Ray Tracing low. Still have DLSS set to auto, that's what it is out of the box, and we can get an average of around 81 FPS. Now personally, what I would do with a game like this is just take it to Ultra settings, DLSS set to balanced, and just have a really great time with it. We're going to average around 81 set up like that, or you could run the ray tracing presets. It's really up to you. Elden Ring 4K Ultra 4070 Ti is definitely going to handle it as long as your CPU can keep up. Now remember, we've got that 13900K here, so it's not going to be an issue. And I'll tell you, this game looks absolutely amazing at 4K Ultra. I mean, we're maxed out here. And the final thing I wanted to test was Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. So I just ran the built-in benchmark. And with this first run, we're at 4K Ultra, no DLSS. We got an average of 82 FPS, but we got a low of 42. So, you know, with it totally maxed out like that, you will have some dips when there's lots of explosions going on. But just taking DLSS to balanced brings our average up to 149 FPS, and we only got a low of 89 FPS. So I'd say this is probably the way you want to play it at 4K on the 4070 Ti, but you know, we can always drop that resolution down to 1440, take it to Ultra, no DLSS, and play it all day long. And of course, you knew we were going to test out some emulation, and when it comes to basically everything that I tested here, your CPU is really going to be the most important part. That 13900K is going to run all of it just fine, but when it's time to upscale, that's where your GPU is going to come into play. Here we have Zinnia, the Xbox 360 emulator with Forza 2, and we can get an average of around 250 FPS. VSync is off here. Next thing I tested was some PS3, but instead of, you know, going to 4K, I wanted to see if we could do 8K with this. So as you can see, we're at a 600% resolution upscale, 8K, And I tested Skate 3, which is definitely a harder one to emulate. It requires a pretty beefy CPU. And the 4070 Ti can definitely hang with the big dogs. I mean, 8K PS3 emulation is pretty hard to do. We do get a few dips, but I really do think it comes down to driver optimizations right now. And I'm sure in the future we won't see any of those dips. And you know, if I didn't have that frame counter on, I wouldn't even notice it went down 2 frames. And the final one I wanted to test here was Yuzu for some Switch emulation. From the settings, you can go all the way up to 6x resolution, which is around, I think, 12K, maybe a little more. But at 4x res, we're at 8K, and it does run these games at full speed. I mean, we're getting great performance here. So Switch emulation at 8K is possible on the 4070 Ti. So far, loving the performance that the ZOTAC 4070 Ti is putting out. Obviously, much more powerful than the older 3070 or 3070 Ti, and it's actually coming in a bit more powerful than the 3080 Ti. But I wouldn't run out and upgrade my 3080 or 3080 Ti to the 4070 Ti. If you've been eyeballing the 3080 Ti at a retail price, then I would kind of have second thoughts and think about the 4070 Ti if this is the kind of price point you want to be in. And of course, everything's overpriced nowadays, but I do think that this is a much better value than the 4080 or even the 4090. I've got the 4090 and really haven't even used 60% of its performance. This is something I could definitely get by with on a day-to-day use case scenario for accelerated video rendering, emulation, and of course, PC gaming. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. Really appreciate you watching. If you're interested in learning more about the ZOTAC AMP Extreme AIRO GeForce RTX 4070 Ti, I'll leave some links in the description. And I do have one more video planned. I actually want to use this as an external GPU over Thunderbolt 4 or USB 4 with some of the handhelds that we have here. I've been really interested to see how these 4000 series cards work externally over Thunderbolt 3 or USB 4, and I've tried the 4090. I didn't have great luck with it, but I do have a new dock on the way and new cable, so we will test it out with this RTX 4070 Ti. If there's anything else you want to see tested with this GPU, or if you've got any questions, let me know in the comments below. And like always, thanks for watching.